The day is over. And yet the one voice that will not clock out is the one still going over your mistakes. There is a science to what that voice does to a body trying to fall asleep. And the time just before rest behaves less like a bedroom and more like a quiet courtroom, where you are somehow both the accused and the judge. Here is the part that gets missed. The verdict you reach about yourself in the dark changes the actual chemistry of the night that follows. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. Tonight moves toward how that inner trial finally adjourns. Not by winning the case, but by setting it down. Close your eyes. You're in the last quiet room of the day, where nothing more is asked. Let the weight settle. And now we begin. You know, the moment your head touches the pillow, instead of quiet, a replay begins. The thing you said, the thing you didn't, the small failure you'd forgotten. Researchers studying pre-sleep cognition call this period the cognitive pre-sleep window, and it appears sensitive to self-directed thought. As the body powers down its external focus, attention turns inward, and whatever judgment you hold gets amplified rather than muted. Studies on rumination suggest this inward turn is not a character flaw, but a predictable feature of how the resting brain reallocates attention. The thoughts feel louder because, for once, nothing else is competing with them. What feels like your mind betraying you is closer to a room gone quiet enough, at last, to hear what was always there. Maybe you've noticed that the same regret feels manageable at noon and unbearable at midnight. Research on circadian mood patterns suggests this is not your imagination. Emotional regulation tends to weaken as the day's resources deplete. The prefrontal cortex, the region that helps you reason with your own harsh conclusions, runs on limited fuel, and by night that fuel is low. With less regulatory support, the raw emotional signal comes through with fewer filters. This is why the verdict you reach at 1 a.m. is often harsher than anything you'd accept in daylight. The court was never fair at that hour. You were trying to judge yourself with the lights already dimmed and the better part of your reasoning already asleep. There's a particular heaviness that arrives when you decide, silently, that today you were not enough. That decision is not only emotional, it has a measurable physical echo. Self-critical thought has been associated in studies with elevated cortisol, the hormone the body releases under perceived threat. The body does not distinguish well between a threat outside the door and a threat coming from your own inner voice. When you accuse yourself, some part of your physiology responds as though it is being chased. Research suggests this is why self-blame and restful sleep rarely share the same hour. The body was simply doing what it was built to do, staying alert for a danger it could not locate, because the danger was the voice describing it. Perhaps you felt your heart seem to race a little when a memory of failure surfaces in the dark. Scientists measure a quiet signal beneath that sensation called heart rate variability, or HO-RV, the subtle variation in time between heartbeats. Higher variability is generally linked to a calmer, more flexible nervous system. Lower variability often accompanies stress and self-directed tension. When self-criticism loops, it tends to lower HRV, nudging the body toward its guarded state at the very hour it needs to release. Your heart was not malfunctioning. It was keeping a rhythm that matched the story you were telling about yourself. And that rhythm can change when the story does. You may carry a private belief that being hard on yourself is what keeps you good. That if you stopped the self-criticism, you'd lose your edge. This belief is so common that researchers have studied it directly, and the findings gently complicated. Studies on self-compassion, led in part by psychologist Kristin Neff, suggest that people who treat themselves with understanding are not less motivated. They tend to recover from setbacks faster and try again sooner. The harsh inner voice does not appear to be the engine of growth it claims to be. It often just adds a second wound on top of the first. What you thought was discipline may have been a habit wearing discipline's clothes. There is a difference between feeling sorry for something and drowning in it. And your body seems to know the difference, even when your mind does not. Psychologist Guy Winch, who wrote about emotional first aid, describes how unattended emotional injuries fester much like physical ones left untreated. Rumination, the endless circling of the same regret, is one of those untreated wounds. Research suggests rumination does not process pain, it preserves it, keeping the original sting fresh through repetition. The mind mistakes the circling for problem solving. But you cannot solve your way out of a feeling by saying it to yourself 100 more times. The replay was never working. It only felt like effort. Think of the last time a small mistake kept you awake far longer than it deserved. Researchers have found that the emotional weight of a memory and its factual size are stored somewhat separately in the brain. The amygdala, a structure tied to emotional salience, can tag a minor event as significant, flooding it with more feeling than the facts warrant. At night, with the prefrontal cortex quieter, that emotional tag goes mostly unchecked. So a forgotten reply or an awkward pause swells until it fills the whole room. The size was never real. It was a volume setting, turned up by a system trying to protect you from repeating a pain it had marked as worth avoiding. You might recognize the feeling of lying perfectly still while your mind sprints. That gap, body motionless, thoughts racing, is one of the clearest signatures of pre-sleep rumination. Sleep researchers note that the transition into sleep requires a kind of cognitive deceleration, a slowing of the mental tempo. And self-critical thought does the opposite. It accelerates. Each accusation generates the next. And the brain, mistaking urgency for relevance, keeps the engine running. Research suggests this is why people who ruminate take longer, on average, to fall asleep. The stillness of your body was an invitation. The mind simply hadn't accepted it yet, because no one had told it the trial was allowed to end. Maybe there's a phrase you say to yourself that you would never say to someone you love. Studies on self-talk suggest the brain does not fully exempt itself from cruelty just because the cruelty is internal. The same regions that register social rejection from others can activate when the rejection comes from within, in a real sense. Harsh self-talk is experienced by the nervous system as a relationship, and a hostile one. Research suggests this internal hostility keeps the stress response partly engaged through the night. You have been sharing your bed with a difficult companion. The gentleness you've been saving for everyone else was always allowed to point inward too. Notice what is already taking shape across these first 9 facts. The inner verdict is not a private mental event, sealed off from the flesh. It is a signal the body reads and answers through cortisol, through heart rhythm, through a nervous system deciding whether to guard or to rest. Self-blame, in other words, is not only something you think, it is something you do to your own physiology. The question underneath it is beginning to sharpen. Why does turning on yourself before sleep change the very chemistry of that sleep? And is there a way to call off the prosecution? The facts ahead follow that question down. Try, right now, not to think of the painful thought, and notice how it only grows louder. Researchers call this thought suppression, and studies suggest it tends to backfire. The effort to not think of something keeps the something active in working memory, like a hand pressing a beach ball underwater. The harder you push, the more force returns. This is part of why just let it go so rarely works at night. The mind cannot release on command what it is still gripping in the act of refusing it. Self-forgiveness, by contrast, does not push the thought away. It changes your relationship to it. And that, research suggests, is the difference between fighting the water and floating in it. There's a reason the same worry feels different after you've said it kindly to yourself even once. Studies on cognitive reframing, the practice of consciously reinterpreting an event, suggest that reframing can lower the body's stress response in measurable ways. When you shift a memory from "I am a failure" to "I did something I regret," and "I'm someone who can learn," the amygdala's alarm tends to soften and prefrontal regulation tends to strengthen. The event hasn't changed. Your nervous system's reading of it has. Of the ways to lower pre-sleep arousal, this reframing is among the most reliable. You are never required to erase the day, only to read it in a kinder, truer light. Perhaps you've assumed forgiveness means deciding the thing didn't matter. The research suggests almost the opposite. Studies on self-forgiveness distinguish it sharply from excusing or forgetting. It involves acknowledging the wrong, accepting responsibility, and then choosing to release the self-punishment that adds nothing to repair. Forgiveness, in this framing, is not a denial of the fact. It is the end of the sentence. The part where the punishment stops because it has served no further purpose. Research suggests this distinction matters for the body, because open-ended self-punishment keeps the stress response open-ended too. You can hold yourself accountable and still let yourself rest. The two were never opposites. You might know the strange relief of finally admitting a mistake out loud to someone safe. Something settles. Researchers studying disclosure and emotional processing have found that putting a feeling into clear language, naming it, tends to reduce amygdala activity. A finding sometimes summarized as "name it to tame it." The vague, swirling self-reproach is harder on the body than the specific, named regret, when you tell yourself precisely what happened, without the global verdict attached. The emotional charge tends to fall. That may be why self-forgiveness often begins with honesty rather than comfort. Naming is the first of 3 small steps you can lean on tonight. Name it, place it, release it. And the clarity itself is already a kind of cooling. There's a tiredness that isn't about sleep at all. the tiredness of carrying a case against yourself for years. Studies suggest chronic self-criticism is associated with sustained low-grade activation of the body's stress systems, the kind that wears on a person over time. This is not a claim that thoughts cause illness. The relationship the research describes is correlational and complex, but the pattern is consistent enough that scientists take it seriously. How you habitually treat yourself appears to register in your physiology. Research suggests the body keeps a kind of running account. The mercy you've withheld from yourself was never free. It was being paid for, quietly, in a currency you couldn't see. Maybe you've noticed that some nights you forgive yourself easily and other nights you cannot find the door. Researchers have found that self-forgiveness is less a single decision than a state the nervous system can be coaxed toward, and that coaxing is easier when the body is already calm. This creates a loop worth knowing. Slowing the breath, softening the body, lowering arousal all make the kinder thought more reachable. And the kinder thought in turn lowers arousal further. Research suggests this is why physical calming and emotional reframing work best together. You don't have to force the forgiveness. You can lower the body first and let the mind follow it down the stairs. You may have felt your breathing go shallow and quick the moment a shameful memory arrives. The breath and the inner verdict are linked more tightly than they seem. Slow, extended exhalation activates the vagus nerve, a primary pathway of the body's rest and recover system, and tends to raise heart rate variability. Research suggests that lengthening the out-breath sends a direct physiological signal of safety, partly independent of what the mind is doing. This means you have a lever the harsh voice cannot reach. While the thoughts argue their case, the exhale can quietly inform the body that the threat has passed. The breath was always there, waiting to be used as the thing it is, a message you can send yourself. Perhaps you've wondered why the people who seem gentlest with themselves also seem the most resilient. Studies on self-compassion suggest the two travel together. People higher in self-compassion show, on average, lower physiological stress reactivity and faster recovery after setbacks. The gentleness is not softness in the dismissive sense. It appears to be a more efficient way of metabolizing pain. Research suggests self-criticism keeps the wound open, while self-compassion lets it close. The fear that kindness would make you weak gets the mechanism backward. The kindness is what frees the energy that self-attack was consuming. What looked like indulgence may be the more durable strength. There's a moment, just before sleep, when you choose, often without noticing, which version of the day to carry into the dark. Researchers studying memory consolidation have found that sleep does not store memories neutrally. The emotional tone present at sleep onset can influence how experiences are processed and filed overnight. This is described in the research as ongoing investigation rather than settled fact, and much of the early work comes from controlled studies. But the implication is gentle and worth holding. The lens you fall asleep through may shape the memory you wake up with. Research suggests the last thought is not nothing. It is, in a quiet way, an instruction. You might have a private library of moments you've never forgiven yourself for, opened only at night. Scientists who study autobiographical memory note that emotionally charged memories are more easily retrieved when mood matches. A low. Self-critical mood pulls up more low. Self-critical memories. This is called mood-congruent recall. And at night, when regulation is thin, the library opens on its own. One regret summons the next. And soon you are reading a whole anthology of your failures. Research suggests this is a feature of how memory is organized, not evidence of how much you've actually done wrong. The collection felt complete because the night had a key to that shelf and no other. Maybe you've tried to reason your way out of guilt and found that logic alone didn't reach it. There's a reason. Researchers distinguish between the cognitive and the emotional registration of an experience, and they don't always update together. You can know intellectually that a mistake was small while the body still treats it as large. Self-forgiveness research suggests that lasting release usually requires reaching the emotional register, not only the logical one. Often through self-directed warmth, imagery, or the felt sense of being understood. Research suggests this is why it wasn't a big deal, rarely lands. The body wasn't waiting for an argument. It was waiting for a tone of voice it could finally trust. Shame has a particular signature. It makes you want to hide, even from yourself. Studies on shame describe it as one of the more isolating emotions, tied to a sense of being fundamentally flawed rather than having simply done something wrong. This distinction, guilt about an act versus shame about the self, appears to matter for the nervous system. Guilt can motivate repair. Shame tends to trigger withdrawal and self-attack. Research suggests self-forgiveness works partly by translating shame back into guilt, returning the problem to something you did rather than something you are. The relief in that translation is real. You were never the flaw. You were a person who did a thing, which is a far smaller and more livable truth. There's a kind of exhaustion that comes from being your own harshest witness all day. Researchers studying attention have found that self-monitoring, the constant background checking of your own performance, consumes genuine cognitive resources. When that monitoring is harsh rather than neutral, it adds an emotional tax on top. By night, you have spent the day under your own surveillance, and the body is tired in a way sleep alone doesn't fully address. Research suggests that easing the self-judgment frees attention and lowers arousal. The watchfulness was supposed to keep you safe, but no one can rest while still standing guard over themselves. Some part of you has been on duty for a very long time. Perhaps you've felt, briefly, what it's like when the self-criticism simply stops. A clearing, like a sound you didn't know was there going quiet. Researchers describe the parasympathetic state, the body's rest and digest mode, as the physiological ground of that clearing. When the stress response stands down, heart rate variability tends to rise. Breathing slows, and the muscles that were braced let go. Self-forgiveness, research suggests, is one path into that state. Not the only one, but a direct one for a mind that has been at war with itself. The clearing was always available. It had only been crowded out by a voice that mistook its noise for necessity. Step back from the cortisol and the heart rhythm a moment, and a larger thing comes into view. This was never only about chemistry. It is about the relationship you've been having with yourself in the dark. The pattern across these first facts is consistent. The harsh conclusion you reach is a physiological event, and it keeps the body braced against itself. And if some nights the weight feels too heavy to lift alone, letting someone you trust, or a professional, help carry it is its own kind of mercy. Never a failure of it. But noticing the mechanism is not the same as changing it. And what happens inside the brain, in the moment forgiveness begins, is where the next arc starts. Right now. The body that spent the day bracing against your own judgment is doing something it does whenever the room finally quiets. It is standing down. Not because the case was settled, because the courtroom emptied. The breath is lengthening on its own. The grip in the shoulders is loosening a degree at a time. Without instruction from you, you don't have to forgive yourself perfectly to begin. The body starts releasing the moment the prosecution pauses. What you haven't heard yet is what happens inside the brain in the seconds after that pause. How the alarm that ran all day actually powers down, and what the nervous system does with the space that opens. That's where the next facts begin. Now we continue. In a rare, gentle moment, the whole body exhales at once. Shoulders, yaw, breath, all releasing together. That coordinated letting go is the parasympathetic system taking the lead. Researchers describe the shift from sympathetic guarding to parasympathetic rest as a kind of physiological handover, and it tends to begin when the brain registers that no response is required. Self-forgiveness sends precisely that signal. Nothing more is owed here, which is why the body often softens before the mind fully agrees. The release isn't a reward for resolving everything. It's what happens when the system stops being told there's still something to defend against. Perhaps you've assumed the amygdala is simply the brain's fear center, the part that makes you anxious. It's gentler and stranger than that. Researchers describe the amygdala as a salience detector. It flags what matters, good or bad, and calls for resources accordingly. When self-criticism floods a memory with significance, the amygdala keeps flagging it, keeping the body mobilized. Cognitive reframing appears to lower that flagging by changing the meaning the memory carries. Research suggests the amygdala quiets not when danger leaves the world, but when the brain reinterprets what it's looking at. You weren't fighting a monster. You were holding the attention of a system that simply needed to be shown the thing was safe to set down. There is a quiet narrator in the mind that picks up the moment you stop focusing on anything in particular, and it tends to turn toward you. As the day's tasks fall away, this self-referential commentary fills the space, and for many people, it speaks in the voice of a critic. Studies suggest that the more a person ruminates, the louder and stickier this inward commentary becomes at rest. Self-compassion appears to change its tone rather than silence it. That is part of why a kinder inner stance shifts the whole texture of pre-sleep thought. The mind was always going to turn toward you in the quiet. The practice simply teaches it to arrive with softer eyes. You might know the feeling of a regret that seems to live in your chest or your stomach rather than your head. That's not a metaphor failing. It's the body keeping score. Researchers studying the gut-brain and heart-brain pathways have found that emotional states register throughout the body, carried partly by the vagus nerve, which connects the brain to the heart. lungs, and digestive organs. Self-criticism and its stress signal travel these routes. Research suggests that calming the body through the vagus nerve can, in turn, ease the emotional state above it. The feeling in your chest was real information, and the same pathway that delivered the ache can carry the message that the ache is allowed to ease. Maybe you've wondered whether saying something kind to yourself actually does anything, or whether it's just words. Studies on self-affirmation and compassionate self-talk suggest the words can do measurable work. But the tone matters more than the content. Research indicates that a warm, sincere internal voice tends to lower stress markers, while a flat or sarcastic one does little. The brain appears to respond to self-directed warmth somewhat as it responds to warmth from a trusted other. Genuine self-kindness, not forced positivity, is what shifts the body. You don't have to believe a grand statement. You only have to speak to yourself the way you'd speak to someone you didn't want to hurt. There's a particular relief in realizing you are not the only one who lies awake prosecuting yourself. Researchers studying the prevalence of self-criticism and rumination have found these patterns to be widespread across cultures and ages, common features of the human mind rather than rare defects. This finding has a name in self-compassion research: common humanity, the recognition that suffering and imperfection are shared. Studies suggest that remembering you are not alone in the failing lowers the isolation shame depends on. And so the loneliness of the 2 in the morning trial is, in part, an illusion. The voice told you that you were uniquely flawed. The evidence says you were only human, which is the opposite of alone. Forgiving someone else, even silently, loosens something in your own body. Researchers studying forgiveness have found that the act, directed at others or the self, is associated with lower blood pressure, reduced stress reactivity, and improved markers of cardiovascular calm. The grudge, it turns out, is held in the body of the one holding it. Self-forgiveness appears to follow the same physiology. Releasing the case against yourself eases the same systems that releasing a grudge against another would. The resentment you've aimed inward was costing you the way any grudge costs its keeper. Setting it down was never only mercy. It was also a physical relief you'd been denying yourself. Perhaps you've tried to fall asleep by force and felt sleep retreat the harder you chased it. Sleep researchers describe this as sleep effort, and it tends to be self-defeating. Sleep is not a task the conscious will can complete. It arrives when the system feels safe enough to surrender control. Self-criticism is a form of staying in control, keeping watch, keeping score. Research suggests that releasing the inner case is partly an act of letting go of that vigilance. The trying was the obstacle. What sleep needed from you was not more effort, but permission. And the permission begins the moment you stop standing over yourself, demanding a better verdict before you're allowed to rest. You might recognize a thought that loops, the same scene, the same words, replaying without resolution. Researchers studying perseverative cognition have found that this looping keeps the stress response active far longer than the original event would. The body responds to the imagined replay almost as it responded to the real thing. Self-forgiveness interrupts the loop, not by arguing with it, but by removing its fuel. The unmet demand for punishment that keeps it spinning. Research suggests that once the demand is released, the loop tends to lose momentum on its own. You are not failing to stop the replay through weakness. The loop was running on a fuel you can choose to stop supplying. There's a softness that arrives in the body when it finally believes it is safe. And you can sometimes feel the exact moment it comes. That moment tracks a quiet turn in the body's regulating systems, a rise in heart rate variability, a gentle slowing of the heart. This calm, sometimes described through the way the vagus nerve steadies us, is the ground sleep grows from. The science of these specific pathways is still developing, and researchers describe it as emerging. But the felt experience needs no footnote. The body recognizes safety when it meets it. Self-forgiveness is one way of telling the body, in its own wordless language, that the safety has arrived. Maybe you've noticed that a warm bath, a kind word, and a moment of self-forgiveness all produce a similar bodily ease. Researchers have found that physical warmth and emotional warmth share overlapping neural territory, which is part of why comfort feels comforting in a literal sense. Self-directed compassion appears to engage some of the same soothing circuitry that a caregiver's touch once did. Research suggests this is why genuine self-kindness can calm the body the way an external comfort would. You have been carrying, all along, a source of the warmth you kept seeking elsewhere. The capacity to soothe yourself was not weakness or self-pity. It was a system you were allowed to use. You might assume that to heal a regret you have to fully resolve it, fix it, undo it, make it right. Researchers studying acceptance-based approaches suggest a different path. That release often comes not from resolution, but from acceptance of what cannot be undone. The past stays fixed, yet your relationship to it can soften. Self-forgiveness lives here, holding both the truth of what happened and the choice to stop punishing yourself for it. Acceptance lowers the struggle. And it's the struggle, not the memory, that keeps the body tense. Some things will not be fixed tonight, and tonight does not require them to be. It only asks that you stop fighting what is already done. There's a reason a good night's sleep makes yesterday's mistake feel smaller. Researchers studying sleep and emotional memory have observed that sleep, particularly REM sleep, appears to help separate the emotional charge of a memory from its factual content over time. Though scientists note this is an active area of study and the picture is still forming, the event remains. The sting may soften. This suggests sleep itself participates in the forgiveness the mind began. The work you do at bedtime, in other words, hands off to a process that carries on without you. What starts as a choice becomes, by morning, something the sleeping brain has quietly continued. Collapsing into sleep from exhaustion and easing into it from peace are not the same rest. Researchers note that sleep onset preceded by high arousal tends to produce lighter, more fragmented sleep, while a calm transition is associated with smoother descent into the deeper stages. Self-forgiveness, by lowering pre-sleep arousal, appears to favor the calmer path. Research suggests the quality of the threshold shapes the quality of the night. How you cross into sleep matters. Not only that you cross, the few minutes spent setting down the case may change not just whether you sleep, but how deeply the sleep restores you. Perhaps you've wondered if any of this could matter for a brain doing its overnight repair work. Researchers have described a process, sometimes called the glymphatic system, observed primarily in animal studies, in which the brain appears to clear metabolic byproducts more actively during sleep. The human evidence is still emerging. What seems clearer is that deeper, less fragmented sleep supports the brain's restorative processes. Research suggests that a calm entry into sleep, unburdened by self-attack, gives those processes a better night to work in. You don't need to understand the chemistry to benefit from it. You only have to give the night the quiet it requires to do what it already knows how to do. You've been listening for a while now, and something in the body has already started to loosen. Take one slow breath, and let the exhale run a little longer than the inhale. The voice that was building its case has gone quieter without you forcing it. We'll keep going together, gently, toward the part where the release becomes something you can feel. You might notice that the moments you forgive yourself most easily are the ones where you feel genuinely understood, even if only by yourself. Researchers studying the felt sense of being understood have found it activates soothing systems in the brain, lowering the defensiveness that shame relies on. Self-forgiveness, at its core, is an act of self-understanding, seeing why you did what you did, with the same context you'd grant a friend. Research suggests this understanding is what lets the body believe the mercy. You cannot soothe yourself with a verdict you don't trust, but you can almost always reach yourself by first trying, honestly, to understand. There's a difference between the regret that teaches and the regret that only punishes, and the body seems to know which is which. Researchers studying adaptive versus maladaptive guilt have found that guilt oriented toward repair tends to resolve, while guilt oriented toward self-condemnation tends to persist and harm. The first kind leads somewhere. The second only circles. Self-forgiveness keeps the lesson and releases the condemnation. Research suggests this is why you can grow from a mistake without bleeding from it indefinitely. The part of the regret worth keeping is the part that makes you kinder or wiser tomorrow. The rest was never payment for anything. It was just a wound you kept reopening. A single act of self-kindness has a strange way of opening room for more. Researchers describe this as an upward spiral. Positive emotional states, broadening attention, and making further positive states more reachable. The mirror image of the downward spiral of rumination. One gentle thought lowers arousal slightly, which makes the next gentle thought easier to find. Research suggests self-forgiveness can start such a spiral at the threshold of sleep. You don't have to forgive everything at once. A single sincere mercy, offered to yourself in the dark, can be the first turn of a wheel that keeps turning after you've let go of it. Perhaps you've assumed that calm is something you either have or don't. Researchers studying nervous system regulation describe it instead as a skill that strengthens with practice. The body learns the path to rest more readily each time it travels it. Self-forgiveness, repeated nightly, appears to function this way. A route the nervous system gets better at finding, which is why the practice tends to work more easily over weeks than on the first night. The first time, you may be clearing a new trail, but trails clear with use. The mercy that feels effortful tonight can become, with repetition, the place your mind goes on its own. You might recognize the held breath that comes with bracing for your own judgment. As if waiting for a blow, researchers note that anticipatory stress, the body preparing for a threat that hasn't arrived, can be as physiologically taxing as the threat itself. When you expect to attack yourself at bedtime, the body braces in advance. Self-forgiveness, practiced consistently, appears to lower this anticipatory bracing, because the body learns the night is no longer the site of an attack. Research suggests the dread eases as the pattern changes. The flinch was learned, and what was learned through repetition can be unlearned the same way. One gentler night after another. There's a quiet power in saying, simply, I did the best I could with what I had then. Researchers studying perspective taking have found that placing a past action in its full context, the fatigue, the limited information, the pressures of that moment, reliably reduces self-blame. You judged yourself with knowledge you only gained afterward. The version of you who acted did not have tonight's clarity. This is the second step. After naming the regret, you place it back inside the moment that made it. You are not the person you are now. Looking back, you were someone inside that moment, doing what seemed possible from within it. And that person deserves the understanding you'd extend to anyone. Some regrets aren't even fully yours. They belong partly to circumstance, to others, to forces you couldn't control. Researchers studying attribution have found that people prone to self-criticism tend to claim too much responsibility, taking the blame for outcomes shaped by many hands. Self-forgiveness includes a fairer accounting, holding your actual part without absorbing the whole. Research suggests this rebalancing eases the disproportionate weight. You are never the sole author of every disappointing outcome. Setting down the portion that was never yours to carry is not avoidance. It is accuracy, and the body rests more easily under a weight that is honestly measured. A tense day lives on in the jaw, the hands, the shoulders long after the day itself has ended. Researchers studying the body's holding of stress note that muscular tension often persists as a kind of postural memory of vigilance. Releasing the inner judgment appears to let this physical bracing soften, sometimes within minutes. Research suggests that as the mind stops accusing, the body stops guarding, and the muscles finally receive permission to let go. The tightness was the body agreeing with the verdict. When the verdict is withdrawn, the holding has nothing left to hold. You can feel it now. Perhaps the places that were clenched beginning to ease. You might know the particular ache of comparing your insides to other people's outsides and finding yourself wanting. Researchers studying social comparison have found it a near universal driver of self-criticism, sharpened in an age of curated images. The comparison is structurally unfair. You measure your full, flawed interior against the polished surface others choose to show. Self-forgiveness includes releasing this rigged contest. Research suggests that stepping out of comparison lowers a steady source of self-directed stress. You are never losing a fair race. You are running against an illusion built to be unbeatable. Tonight you're allowed to leave that track and simply be a person. Resting, owed nothing by the comparison you finally set down. Halfway through, the answer is beginning to take a clearer shape. The chemistry of the night bends toward whoever you decide to be in the dark, and the decision is more available than it felt. But here is the tension the second half follows. If self-forgiveness is this reachable, why does the harsh voice return night after night? Even after you've released it before, the releasing, it turns out, is not a single victory, but a practice the body has to relearn against an old, well-worn habit. What the next facts follow is not whether you can forgive yourself, but why it keeps needing to be done again, and what makes it finally hold. What just opened? The question of why the kindness you found before keeps slipping away by the next night is not only a neuroscience question. You may be carrying both sides of it right now. The relief of having released the case, and the quiet fear that it will all be waiting again tomorrow. Both can be true at once. The habit is old, and the new path is young. The second half of tonight follows what happens when the gentler route is traveled often enough to become the one the body takes on its own. Feel your shoulders. Let them be wherever they are. Let the exhale carry a little more of the weight out with it. Now we continue. An old self-criticism can feel so automatic, it arrives before you've even chosen it. Researchers studying habit formation have found that repeated thoughts carve efficient neural pathways, much as repeated actions do. The brain favors the route it has traveled most. A lifetime of self-blame builds a well-worn road. Research suggests new patterns are not installed by force but by repetition, gradually making the kinder route the more familiar one. The automatic harshness is not the truth about you. It is only the most practiced path. And practice, by its nature, can be redirected toward a road you'd rather travel. There's a reason the gentlest voice you can imagine often sounds like someone who once loved you well. Researchers studying internalized attachment suggest that the way we were cared for early on shapes the inner voice we later use on ourselves. A harsh inner critic often echoes a harshness once received. The encouraging finding is that this inner voice can be revised. Many people learn, over time, to internalize a kinder figure. Research suggests self-forgiveness is partly the practice of changing whose voice narrates your nights. You can choose the tone of your own company. The cruel narrator was learned. A gentler one can be learned in its place. You might notice that forgiving yourself feels easier on nights when you've been kind to others during the day. Researchers studying compassion have found that the capacity for kindness, inward and outward, appears to draw on shared neural systems. Practicing warmth toward others may strengthen the same circuitry you turn on yourself. Research suggests compassion is less a fixed trait than a muscle that grows with use. In any direction. The mercy you gave away during the day was not lost. It was, in a sense, also training, strengthening the very capacity you now turn toward yourself in the quiet, where it was always allowed to point. Perhaps you've felt the way naming a feeling precisely seems to shrink it. Researchers continue to find support for affect labeling, that putting an emotion into specific words tends to reduce its intensity and grip. Vague, global self-judgment is harder to release than a clearly named, specific regret. Research suggests that the act of articulating, even silently, "I feel ashamed about this one thing," begins the easing. The fog of self-condemnation resists you. The named feeling can be met. Tonight, if a heaviness rises, you might try simply naming it, not arguing, only naming it, and noticing how the naming itself loosens its hold. The harshest self-judgments tend to lean on words like always and never. Researchers studying cognitive distortions identify this as overgeneralization, turning a single event into a sweeping verdict about your whole character. I made a mistake becomes I always ruin things. The body responds to the larger claim, not the smaller truth. Research suggests that catching and softening these absolutes is one of the more reliable ways to lower their charge. The verdict was inflated by a single word, returning the claim to its honest size. This once, this thing, returns the feeling to a size the body can actually rest beside. There's a tenderness in realizing that the part of you that judges is, in its own way, trying to protect you. Researchers suggest self-criticism often originates as an attempt to avoid future pain, to catch your faults before others can. The inner critic, in this view, is a frightened guardian using the only method it knew. Research suggests that meeting this part with understanding, rather than fighting it, tends to ease its grip more than argument does. You don't have to wage war on your own harshness. You can recognize what it was trying to do, thank it quietly, and show it a gentler way to keep you safe. You might know the relief of writing a worry down and finding it loosens its hold. Researchers studying expressive writing have found that putting troubling thoughts on paper before bed can reduce rumination and ease sleep onset. The page holds what the mind was straining to carry. Research suggests this externalizing is one practical companion to self-forgiveness, setting the case down somewhere outside your head. If the voice grows loud, the writing gives it a place to rest that isn't your body. The thought, once on the page, no longer needs you to keep holding it through the night. You can let the paper carry it until morning. A single deep, slow breath can interrupt a spiral mid-turn. Slow breathing, particularly with a long exhale, shifts the nervous system toward calm within a handful of breaths, so the body can lead the mind toward forgiveness, rather than the reverse. This is the third step, the one that closes the small practice. After you name the regret and place it in its moment, you let a long exhale carry it out. The breath asks nothing of your reasoning. It tells the body, in a language older than words, that it is safe to let go. You may have noticed that self-forgiveness feels less like a grand event and more like a small, repeated turning. Researchers studying behavior change have found that lasting shifts come from many small repetitions rather than single sweeping resolutions. The nightly choice to set down the case, even imperfectly, accumulates. Research suggests the practice compounds quietly, like interest, until the gentler response becomes the default. You are not failing because the forgiveness has to be renewed. The renewal is the method. Each small turning, offered again tonight, is laying down the path that future nights will travel more easily, until one evening the kindness arrives before the criticism does. There's a particular peace in accepting that you will make mistakes again, that imperfection is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be lived. Researchers studying psychological flexibility have found that accepting one's own fallibility rather than fighting it, is associated with lower distress and greater resilience. The demand to be flawless is itself a source of suffering. Research suggests releasing the demand eases the body more than meeting it ever could. You were never going to be perfect, and tonight you are allowed to stop requiring it. The mistakes ahead are not failures of the practice. They are simply the texture of being a person. You might recognize the way a kind thought toward yourself can feel almost physical, like warmth spreading. Researchers studying compassion-focused practices have observed shifts in heart rate and other calming markers when people generate self-directed warmth, sometimes through imagining a compassionate figure or a soothing voice. The body appears to respond to imagined kindness somewhat as it would to real kindness received. Research suggests this is why guided self-compassion can settle the nervous system. You can summon comfort from within, using only attention and a gentler tone. The warmth you've waited to receive from elsewhere was, in part, always something you could generate yourself. Perhaps you've felt how exhaustion makes the inner critic louder, not quieter. Researchers studying sleep deprivation have found that a tired brain shows heightened amygdala reactivity and weaker prefrontal regulation, the exact combination that makes self-criticism harder to manage. This creates a loop. Self-blame disrupts sleep, and poor sleep worsens self-blame, easing the nighttime self-attack. Then, helps protect the sleep that protects your gentler self the next day. Breaking the loop at the bedtime end has reached beyond the night. The kindness you offer yourself now is also a kindness to the tomorrow that will have more strength to meet itself gently. Gratitude and self-forgiveness seem to share a room. Researchers studying gratitude have found it shifts attention toward what was given and received, away from what was lacked or lost. Practiced before sleep. Gratitude has been associated with improved sleep quality and lower pre-sleep worry. It softens the lens through which you review the day. Research suggests pairing a brief gratitude with self-forgiveness deepens both. You can hold, in the same quiet moment, what you regret and what you're thankful for. The day was rarely all failure. Naming even one thing that was good gently widens the story you carry into the dark. There's a difference between the person who made the mistake and the person now lying awake judging them. And it is real. Not just poetic. Researchers studying self-continuity have found that we relate to our past selves somewhat as we relate to other people, with measurable psychological distance. This means you can extend to your past self the understanding you'd offer a friend who erred. Research suggests this gentle distance supports self-forgiveness. The one who acted is not exactly the one judging now. You can look back at them the way you'd look at someone you care about who was struggling, with the wish to comfort, not condemn. We now understand that self-forgiveness is not a soft denial of responsibility, but a precise act with a measurable footprint in the body. And it has a shape simple enough to practice tonight. First, name the one specific thing, not the whole sweeping judgment. Second, place it back in its context. What you knew then, what you carried, what seemed possible from inside that moment. Third, let one long, slow exhale carry it out, and let yourself rest. Name it, place it, release it. How you treat yourself at the threshold of sleep registers in the body, And this small sequence is one steady way to lower the night's alarm. You might recognize the relief of a long-held breath finally released. The way the whole body seems to drop an inch. Researchers note that the exhale is tied to parasympathetic activation, the body's signal to rest. Across these facts, a quiet instruction has been forming. Lead with the body, and let the mind follow. When the reframing feels out of reach, the breath remains. The most accessible doorway of all. Tonight you don't have to begin with the perfect thought. You can begin with one long, slow exhale, and trust that the gentler mind will meet the body where the body has gone first. A memory loses some of its sting simply by being held without resistance. Researchers studying mindfulness have found that observing a difficult thought without struggling against it tends to reduce its emotional intensity over time. The thought can be present without being fought or believed. Research suggests this non-resistant attention is a close companion to self-forgiveness. Both involve dropping the struggle. You don't have to push the regret away or argue it down. You can let it sit in the room, neither fed nor fought, and watch it grow quieter on its own, the way any guest does when no one argues with them. You may have noticed that the kindest thing you can offer yourself at night is sometimes just permission to stop. Researchers emphasize that the nervous system needs genuine off-time to restore, and that self-criticism is a form of staying on. Permission to rest, fully granted, is itself restorative. Research suggests that allowing yourself to be done for the day lowers arousal and eases the transition to sleep. The day's accounting can close. You are allowed to declare it finished. Even with things unresolved, the permission is yours to grant. And granting it is not laziness. It is the precondition for the rest your body has waited all day to receive. There's a steadiness that comes from realizing that forgiving yourself doesn't make you forget the lesson. Researchers studying memory and emotion have found that releasing the emotional charge of an experience does not erase its instructional content. You can keep the wisdom while shedding the wound. The fear that mercy means repeating the mistake gets the relationship backward. Research suggests that self-compassion supports learning rather than undermining it. You will carry forward what the mistake taught you. What you set down is only the punishment, which taught nothing it hadn't already taught on the first night. The lesson stays. The lash can go. You might feel, by now, a quieting that wasn't there an hour ago. Researchers describe how sustained calm allows the parasympathetic state to deepen, lowering heart rate, easing breathing, settling the mind towards sleep. The practice of these nights, the breath, the reframing, the released verdict, accumulates into this kind of evening. The body remembers the route once it has traveled it enough. And you are, perhaps, partway down it now. The thoughts have less edge than they did. The grip has loosened. What an hour ago took effort is beginning to happen on its own. The way a familiar road no longer needs a map. Perhaps you've sensed that the harshest nights are often the ones where you most need gentleness, and least believe you deserve it. Researchers studying shame have found that the moments of deepest self-condemnation are precisely when self-compassion is hardest to access and most beneficial. The voice insists you haven't earned kindness. Research suggests that offering it anyway, especially then, is what gradually weakens the voice's authority. On the nights it feels least deserved, it is doing the most work, teaching a frightened part of you that care does not depend on a flawless day. Once the body softens, the mind's grip on the day loosens almost on its own. Researchers describe the bidirectional link between physical state and thought. A calm body makes calm thoughts more reachable, and gentler thoughts further calm the body. This loop, running downward into rest, is the opposite of the rumination spiral. Self-forgiveness can tip you from one loop into the other. You don't have to climb out of the difficult night by force. You only have to begin the gentler loop once, with a breath or a kind word, and let it carry you the rest of the way towards sleep. There's a quiet dignity in treating yourself as someone worth caring for, even in private, even when no one is watching. Researchers studying self-compassion describe it not as self-indulgence, but as a stable foundation for well-being and resilience. The way you treat yourself in the unwatched hours shapes the self you bring to all the watched ones. Research suggests this private kindness has public reach. The mercy you practice alone at night becomes the steadiness others meet in you by day. You are not being soft with yourself for no reason. You are tending the root from which everything else you offer the world quietly grows. You might feel how much lighter the body becomes when it stops carrying the case against itself. Researchers note that releasing chronic self-directed stress is associated with measurable physical ease. Slower heart, deeper breath, looser muscles. The weight was real, and so is its setting down. Research suggests the body has been waiting for this permission longer than you knew. Notice, if you can, how the chest has more room than it did, how the jaw has unclenched, how the breath reaches lower. This is the body answering the mercy. It does not argue with kindness the way the mind does. It simply receives it and lets go. The question is answered. In its clearest form, self-forgiveness is a psychological technique that supports the nervous system's recovery, not a sign of weakness or a way of dodging the truth. It holds the fact and releases the punishment, lowering the stress signal that keeps the body braced through the night. It is learnable, repeatable, and grows easier with practice, the way any well-traveled path does. From here, the facts soften. Less to explain, more to settle into. What these hours have been pointing toward, the body has been ready to feel all along, that the gentlest verdict is also the truest, and it was always yours to give. Every night, whatever the day's verdict, the body begins to come down, not because the case was won, because the hour itself releases it. Cortisol falls toward its floor on a clock older than any regret you carry. The way a courtroom empties whether or not the trial ever reached a verdict. Right now, without effort, without instruction from you. That descent is already happening. It has happened every night of your life. Even the hard ones. The facts that remain don't need to be understood. They only need to arrive where the body is already going. We're almost there. There is a softening that comes when you stop asking the night to fix anything. Researchers studying acceptance describe this release of the struggle as its own kind of rest. The mind that demanded resolution can finally set the demand down. Nothing has to be solved before sleep. The day can stay imperfect, and the body can still let go. What you released tonight was never the truth of what happened, only the grip you kept on it. And the grip, once opened, leaves the hand free to rest. You know the feeling of finally being understood, and how the body eases the moment it arrives. That understanding is something you can offer yourself. The version of you who erred today was doing what seemed possible from inside that moment. Researchers studying self-kindness find that this understanding lowers the body's defenses. You do not have to agree with everything you did to understand why you did it. The understanding is the mercy, and the mercy is what lets the shoulders drop. Notice how much quieter the inner voice has become. The case it was building has lost its audience. Researchers note that thoughts deprived of engagement tend to fade rather than escalate. You did not silence the voice by winning the argument. You simply stopped sitting in the courtroom. The voice grows distant when no one answers it. And in the space where the argument was, there is room now for something gentler to settle. There is a kind of warmth that needs no source outside yourself. You can feel it now. Perhaps the way a kind thought spreads through the chest. Researchers studying self-compassion find the body responds to inner warmth much as it responds to comfort received. You have been carrying the comfort all along. The hands that braced against your own judgment can become the ones that hold you instead. Tonight, let them. The breath has slowed without your asking. Researchers tie this slowing to the body's deepening rest. The long exhale, carrying the day out a little at a time. You don't have to direct it. The body knows how to come down once the mind stops calling it back up. Each exhale is a little more of the weight leaving. Each one asks nothing of you but to let it go. You may feel the difference between the person who lay down an hour ago and the one resting here now. Nothing about the day changed. Only the verdict did. Researchers studying reframing find that the same facts, held more gently, produce a calmer body. The mistake is still the mistake, but it no longer has the whole night in its grip. That is what mercy does. Not erase. Only loosen. There is no accounting left to settle tonight. The day's ledger can close with columns still open, and the body can rest anyway. The unfinished does not have to be finished to be set down. Whatever remains undone will still be there tomorrow, and tomorrow will meet it with more light than this hour has. For now, there is nothing to balance and no one to answer to. Only the dark, and the breath, and you. Feel how the places that were clenched have begun to ease. The jaw, the hands, the small of the back. Researchers note that as the mind stops accusing, the body stops guarding. The tension was the body agreeing with the harsh verdict. With the verdict withdrawn, it has nothing left to hold. Let it finish letting go. There is no posture to maintain in the dark. You are not the only one who has lain awake like this. The trial you held against yourself is one that nearly everyone holds. In their own words, on their own hard nights. Researchers call this shared imperfection common humanity. The loneliness of it was the illusion. You were never uniquely flawed, only human, which is the most ordinary and forgivable thing there is. And the whole quiet world is, in its own beds, learning the same mercy. The memory may still be there, but notice it has less edge now. Researchers studying mindfulness find that a thought held without struggle loses its intensity over time. You haven't pushed it away. You've simply stopped fighting it. And in the absence of the fight, It has grown quieter. It can stay in the room. It no longer needs to keep you awake. It, too, is allowed to rest now. There is a steadiness in knowing the lesson stays even when the punishment goes. Researchers find that releasing the emotional charge of a mistake does not erase what it taught. You will carry the wisdom forward into a gentler tomorrow. What you set down tonight taught nothing it hadn't already taught. Only the wound remained, reopening each night. You are allowed, finally, to let it close. Feel the weight that has lifted from the chest. The case against yourself was heavier than you knew, and the body has been waiting to set it down. Researchers tie this release to slower heart, deeper breath, looser muscle. The lightness now is the body answering the mercy. It does not argue with kindness the way the mind does. It simply receives it, the way dry ground receives rain. For years, perhaps, you believed that being hard on yourself was the price of being good. Tonight, the body offers a different truth. The gentleness did not make you weak. It freed the energy the self-attack was quietly consuming. Researchers find self-compassion travels with resilience, not against it. You were never too soft. You were carrying a harshness that cost more than it ever gave. And you are allowed to set it down. The night is doing its own quiet work now. Sleep, when it comes, continues the releasing the mind began, softening the charge of the day's memories over the hours ahead. Researchers describe this as an ongoing area of study, but the direction is gentle and consistent. You are not the only one doing the healing. The night takes up part of the work you set down. You only have to let it begin. So why does turning on yourself before sleep change the chemistry of the night? It already has its answer, written through these hours. Because the body reads your verdict and responds with its whole physiology. And because a gentler verdict lets it rest. You have been giving the body a kinder instruction, and the body, all evening, has been quietly carrying it out. There is a particular peace in accepting that you will need to do this again. The forgiveness is not a single victory but a practice, renewed each night, growing easier each time. Researchers find lasting change comes from repetition, not from one grand resolution. You are not failing because tomorrow may ask for mercy again. The asking is the method, and each time, the path is a little more warm, a little easier to find. Feel how the body has settled toward its natural floor, cortisol falling, breath slowing, heart easing into a calmer rhythm. None of it required your effort. It required only that you stop calling the body back into the fight. Researchers tie this descent to the body's oldest clock. You are riding a rhythm far older than today's regret. And it knows the way down. The voice that prosecuted you has gone nearly silent. Not defeated, just no longer needed. Researchers note the inner critic often began as a frightened guardian, trying to keep you safe the only way it knew. You can let it rest too. It has worked hard, in its harsh way. Tonight it can learn there is a gentler way to keep you, and that the watch can finally be set down. There is room in the chest now that wasn't there before. The breath reaches lower. The exhale runs long. Researchers tie the extended exhale to the body's deepest signal of safety. You are sending that signal without trying. Each slow breath tells the oldest part of you that the threat has passed, that the night is safe, that it is allowed, at last, to let go completely. You may feel sleep beginning to gather at the edges, the way dusk gathers before you notice the light has changed. Researchers describe the threshold into sleep as a surrender, not an effort. You don't have to chase it. You only have to stop standing guard. The watch is over. The case is closed. There is nothing left to defend. And so the descent can simply continue on its own. The day stays imperfect, and you are at peace with it anyway. That is the whole of it. Not a day made flawless, but a person who stopped requiring flawlessness before rest. Researchers find this acceptance eases the body more than any resolution could. You are allowed to be unfinished and still sleep. You always were. Tonight you are simply letting yourself feel the kindness you've turned inward tonight, and how the body has answered it with quiet. This was never indulgence. It was the tending of the root from which your steadiness grows. The mercy practiced alone in the dark becomes the calm others meet in you by day. You have been doing something gentle and real, and the body, easing now, knows it. There is nothing more required of you. The day is done. The case is closed. The body has come down to its floor. Researchers describe this state as the ground of true rest. You have arrived at it not by winning but by releasing. The releasing was the whole path. And here, at its end, there is only the quiet, and the breath, and the gathering dark inviting you in. Notice how natural the gentleness has become. Here at the edge of sleep, the harshness that felt so automatic an hour ago has loosened its hold. This is what practice builds toward. Not a sudden shift, but a quiet evening where mercy arrives before judgment does. You have traveled the gentler road tonight, and roads, once traveled, grow easier to find again. The real change was never in the mistake, or even in the science. It was in the simple, ancient act of turning toward yourself with mercy instead of away from yourself in blame. You are not someone who needed to be punished into rest. You were always someone who could be forgiven into it. Most of all, by you. And tonight, perhaps for the first time in a long while, you were. Let that be the thought you carry down into sleep. After 100 quiet facts about the trial we hold against ourselves in the dark, let the trial itself dissolve now. Not won, not lost, simply ended. The room emptied. The lights left off. Let your whole body grow as quiet as a courtroom after everyone has gone home, where there is no one left to accuse and no one left to judge. Let the last edges of the day dissolve into the larger quiet that was always underneath it. There is nothing to decide, only the dark, and your breath, and rest. The voice that judged you today was never the truest thing in the room. It was only the loudest, the most practiced, the most afraid. And tonight you met it with something quieter. You named the one thing, not the whole sweeping verdict. You placed it back inside the moment that made it, and you let your breath carry it out. Name it, place it, release it. That was the whole of it. Not proving your innocence, not fixing what couldn't be fixed, only deciding, here in the dark, to stop standing over yourself with the gavel raised. The body answered. The breath slowed. And the mercy you found was not borrowed from anyone. It was yours. It was always yours. You simply remembered, tonight, that you were allowed to give it to yourself. But making peace with the day is only one half of what the night can do. Why is it that the connections you couldn't find while awake, the understanding that wouldn't come no matter how hard you reached for it, so often arrive on their own by morning? As if sleep had been quietly working while you let go. The next video in the Psychology of Emotional Healing and Recovery playlist begins there. You can let these thoughts settle now, like papers in a closed file, set on a shelf in a room you are finally leaving for the night. Let your shoulders grow heavy with the quiet that comes after a case has been set down. If sleep comes, let it take you to the place where nothing is being weighed and nothing is owed. But if your eyes are closed, stay there. Rest well. Gentle mind, you carried the practice tonight, and you can carry it again tomorrow. Name it, place it, release it. That is all it ever asks. Where science becomes the softest place to rest. Good night.